everybody, I am here with your 2025 astrology headlines for the year ahead. So this is the major transits, the major things that are happening astrological wise for the year 2025, and it is a big year. This is a year where there is going to be some profound changes going on in the world. Same with 2026. 2025 and 2026 are pivotal years that astrologers have been looking at for a long time. 2020 was as well. I feel like this might be like on that same level, if not more so. So I feel like there is just big shifts going on in the world coming this year and next year. And so I wanted to talk about the major headlines that are coming up this year. This isn't overly detailed, but it is going to show you what the major things are happening. We're going to talk about things like the outer planets. They're all shifting signs this year. We also have, a Mars, a Venus retrograde this year. We always have Mercury retrogrades. That's not unusual, but we'll touch on those a little bit too. And then we have like our eclipses. And again, eclipses happen every year, but they are shifting signs this year, which is a change as well. So it's like any one of these things is, a headline, but we have a lot of headlines this year, a lot of shifting and changing energy going on. And so that what makes 2025 like such a pivotal year when it comes to astrology. Now, if you want more detailed astrology, I do have on my Patreon a weekly astrology report where I talk in detail about the weekly headlines. I also have on my website, there's a free newsletter where I give you the headlines for the month as well. So that's something you can sign up for free. And then of course, on my Etsy shop, you can purchase a reading. They're actually on sale now, my year ahead 2025 readings, including my year ahead astrology reading, where you can find out what it means specifically for you in 2025. But let's get into the headlines because that's what you're here for. So I made a lot of notes. There's a lot of notes, a lot of scribbles here. I've got my notes going on. The first thing I want to talk about is Pluto in Aquarius, which already happened. Pluto shifted into Aquarius in November 2024 for good. We kind of had like a little bit of a preview in 2023 in the spring, and then he retrograded back into Capricorn. And then in January of 2024, he went into Aquarius and he was there until September. And then we had a retrograde back into Capricorn, and now he's in Aquarius for good. So I just want to make mention of this because Pluto is going to be in Aquarius until like 2043, 2044. This is a 20-year transit. Pluto moves very slowly. He takes 248 years to go all the way around the zodiac. So this is like when Pluto shifts signs, it is like this is when eras shift and change, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it is something that is going to be continuing to shift and change as we go further. Pluto goes further into the sign of Aquarius. So Pluto is about power. Pluto is also about death. And so Pluto often like brings change that like once things have changed, they do not go back. And that change isn't overnight. Pluto is slow change, but it is change that like it's gone and it's not coming back. Like the Pluto and Capricorn era is done, and we are now in a new era. Pluto is also about those that abuse power as well, and often reveals power dynamics where things have been unequal or somebody has abused their position of power. So when we had Pluto in Capricorn, we started off in 2008, Pluto in Capricorn. We had the financial crisis. We had like, banks, just like dissolving and things. We had the housing crisis, all these things, right? And so it showed Capricorn's about structures, and it's about tradition and order and big business and government. And over those years from 2008 until now, like 2023, 2024, we've seen how like government and banks and institutions, how their power has been used and abused, and how we have this wider gap now between the rich and the poor, from those in power and those without. And it also heavily put power into the hands of traditional authority and into authoritarianism. And so we have this kind of like building up of that energy. Now we have Pluto going into Aquarius. And Pluto in Aquarius, Aquarius has a lot of associations with revolution. The last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we had, it was the end of the American Revolution, and America became like, the US became a country. We have the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. There were a lot of where people rose up against those who had abused their power for too long. And so there is this kind of revolutionary energy. And then in the Pluto in Aquarius era before that one, we had the Protestant Reformation that was going on, where the church had held too much power, and then people rebelled against that. So it'll be interesting to see as Pluto goes into Aquarius over the next 20 years, what happens, like what kind of reforms happen when it comes to those in authority that have gained too much power, the structures that have built up, you know, all of this inequality. And this isn't going to be evenly distributed across the globe, right? But these kind of revolutions do have effects on the rest of the globe and on the human psyche and the era that we're in. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of revolutions or what kind of changes happen over the next 20 years. Again, remember, this isn't overnight. The other thing is there's often technological revolutions because Aquarius has associations with technology. So the last one we had technology as in the Industrial Revolution happened that, you know, really changed the way that we live and work. And before that, the one before that had the printing press, which brought a lot of change. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now, obviously, about things like AI being a thing, you know, technology advancing in ways that we, you know, haven't anticipated before, technological revolutions. So again, this is something that's going to be happening over 20 years, but I think it's really worth mentioning as we start off this forecast that that's something that's definitely fully in play. We are not going back to the Capricorn era, Pluto in Aquarius. The second thing that I want to talk about, and I'm trying to go kind of in order of the year, is we start off the year with a Mars retrograde. Now, Mars retrogrades happen every 2.5 years or so. And so this particular one started on December 6th of 2024 and will last till February 23rd of 2025. It goes from 6 degrees of Leo back to 17 degrees of Cancer. And Mars is going to retrograde. He's going to go backwards. And he's going to go switch back from Leo into Cancer on January 6th. So early in the year, we're going to be moving back into the sign of Cancer. Now, Mars is all about, he is about aggression and it can be about like violence and war, but also our will and our desire, where we put our energies. And so when Mars is in Leo, he tends to be kind of a bully. He can be a good leader, but he can also be a bit of a bully. When he moves back into the sign of Cancer, he becomes very protective about what he loves. And so it's very much about protecting the things that we care about, and sometimes feeling like overly protective of things. Mars retrogrades tend to be times of frustration. We can't move forward in quite the way that we want to. We may feel throughout the months of January and February that, you know, we're kind of frustrated. We can't quite accomplish what we want to accomplish. We're feeling very protective about things. So if there is some sense of like frustration in that Mars retrograde. Mars is going to move back into the sign of Leo on April 17th. He won't be out of sort of that Cancer and Leo area until June 17th. So we're spending that first part of the year with Mars in either Leo or in that Cancer energy. But the major parts, like the retrograde itself goes until February 23rd. Once we get past there, we should start to feel like we're starting to move forward again. So you might feel like in January, February, you can't quite move forward in the way that you'd like to. It doesn't mean you can't make progress, but it's like slow and steady, one thing at a time. It's kind of like, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like, it's okay if you're not moving forward at quite the pace that you want to. Now, if you would know your astrology chart, look at your Leo and your Cancer houses to see where this frustration might be occurring, and just give yourself extra time to do any projects in these areas. The next thing I want to talk about is we also have a Venus retrograde coming up in the spring. Like, really, the spring is like retrogrades all over the place. So we have a Venus retrograde. Venus retrogrades happen I feel like they happen every 1.5 years or so, every 2 years, somewhere in there. But anyway, they're not every year. Venus retrograde is going from March 1st to April 12th of this year. It starts at 10 degrees of Aries and moves back to 24 degrees of Pisces. So Venus moves back from Aries into Pisces on March 27th, just so you know. So look at your Pisces and your Aries houses, because this Venus retrograde is going to affect that. So we have this Mars retrograde, that kind of ends at the end of February. And then we get into March and we immediately have a Venus retrograde. So a lot of retrograde energy going on. Venus retrogrades, tend to be, they tend to bring stuff back to us like lovers. They can bring friends back to us. Sometimes, that's a good thing. Sometimes not. A lot of times Venus retrograde, we take back that old, lover, and then we realize very quickly why we let them go in the first place. The other piece of advice I always have with a Venus retrograde is don't do any major changes to your look. Don't cut your hair off. Don't get a tattoo. Don't throw out your whole wardrobe and buy a new one thinking this is the new me. Because often when that Venus retrograde ends, we go, ooh, why did I do that? I don't feel so good about that. There's nothing wrong with trying different things for sure. But wait till, if you want to make a big change, wait till the retrograde is over before you make any dramatic changes. So this kind of overlaps with, we have the Mars retrograde, we go into Venus retrograde, and then we have a Mercury retrograde as well. So a lot of retrogrades going on in the spring. So there's always 3 Mercury retrogrades in a year. This is not unusual. The first retrograde starts on March 14th and goes to April 7th. So we have this, right as we're getting into this Venus retrograde, we have Mercury retrograde start. It goes from 9 degrees of Aries back to 26 degrees of Pisces. So again, it's affecting both your Aries and your Pisces house. These will be very activated during the spring. These are areas where you may feel some frustration going on. You might be reassessing things, reevaluating things in this area. Mercury retrogrades are good for reevaluating things, for relooking at things, for editing things, for redoing things. Maybe there's something you started you need to kind of do a little bit differently. Just so you know, Mercury moves back into the sign of Pisces on March 29th as part of that retrograde. So really the spring is characterized, the early part of this year. We have the Mars retrograde in January and February that's really making people feel kind of frustrated, maybe overprotective about things. And then as we're getting out of that, we feel like we're moving forward. We have a Venus retrograde bringing back all this kind of old stuff, old emotional stuff for us to reassess and reevaluate. And we have a Mercury retrograde who's telling us we need to reevaluate and edit things and redo things and look at things differently. So this first part of the year is really a time where we're actually going to be feeling like we're not moving forward as much as we'd like to, and we might be feeling like we need to reevaluate things before we move forward again. So just a heads up about the first quarter of the year. The next thing that I have on the list here is we have eclipses also going on in the month of March. So March is kind of a month with a lot of astrological things going on. So we have 2 sets of eclipses every year. This isn't unusual. This happens every year. There's always a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse. They're about 2 weeks apart. And then 6 months later, you'll have again another set. You'll have a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse that are 2 weeks apart. So what's interesting is this year is the eclipses happen in opposite signs. And for the last year and a half or so, they've been happening in Aries and Libra. Well, this year it switches to Pisces and Virgo. So again, if you know your chart, look at those houses because that's where you're going to see shifts and changes. Eclipses often bring sudden changes into our lives. They try to get us back on the path. They bring these sudden changes, things that happen very quickly. Eclipses can also, bring the endings of things and new beginnings, and they can also reveal hidden information to us. So when we start the year, we're still kind of in that shift between these 2 axes. So what we have is on March 13th, we have a lunar eclipse, which lunar eclipses are on full moons, at 23 degrees of Virgo. So if you have planets in Virgo or around 23 degrees of any of the signs, you're probably going to feel this eclipse more than others. And so this one's in the sign of Virgo. And so it's shifting into that Virgo and Pisces axis. And Virgo tends to be about details, it's about service, it's about health. And so if we look at things going on in the world, we may find that there is information. Lunar eclipses tend to reveal hidden information about things, about work, about like labor, about health services. Watch for those kind of things to come out, some hidden information in March. And then on March 29th, we have our last eclipse in the sign of Aries for the next 9 years or so. And this is going to be a solar eclipse at 9 degrees of Aries. And so solar eclipses happen, they're new moons, or when, if there's going to be an eclipse, solar eclipse, it's going to be in a new moon. So that's on March 29th, right at the end of March. And so this, interestingly enough, when the eclipses first switched into that Aries Libra axis was in October of 2023, and we all know that that's when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict really like exploded. And so I'm hoping that this will be the end of that. I'm hoping that this marks the end of that conflict. Hopefully not a new phase of that conflict for everyone's sake. But I'm hoping that that's what that means on a global level. On an individual level, look at your Aries chart. There may be whatever changes have been going on in the Aries part of your chart. There may be some ending or beginning that's happening there that kind of really wraps up the last year and a half of changes in this area. So March is an active month this year. And then if it wasn't active enough, the next thing we have Neptune changing into a new sign after being in the sign of Pisces for 14 years. And so Neptune is going to be going into Aries on March 30th, so right at the end of March. So he is not going to spend the whole year in the sign. He's going to be there until October 22nd. And because of retrograde, he's going to retrograde back into Pisces for a little while. And then he goes back into Aries for good in 2026. But we will get a preview of what the next 14 years of Neptune in Aries will be for us from March until October. Now, Neptune represents spirituality, idealism, imagination, and so it represents like that spiritual, imaginative sign. And he's been in the sign of Pisces since about 2011, 2012. And if you think of like spirituality in the sign of Pisces, Pisces is very spiritual in and of itself. Neptune, by modern astrologers, is said to rule Pisces, so he's been very happy in that sign. Neptune in Pisces tends to be a time when spirituality is very on vogue, right? Like this has been these last 14 years or so. Everyone is like into tarot and astrology and witchcraft and New Age and all that kind of stuff, right? Very open kind of spirituality. This is also, though, on the other side, you have like religious fervor in things like, forces like Christianity and evangelicalism. If you look at the last time that Neptune was in the sign of Pisces, this is when you have the spiritualist movement develop in the 19th century. You also got like people, this is when Christians invented the rapture, Christian evangelicals. The rapture is not biblical. It is a invention of the 1840s. But you have like these kind of like spiritual kind of movements that are going on. Well, we're moving out of there and we're moving into the sign of Aries. And Aries is a fire sign. It is a sign that's very much about the individual and the hero. And if we look back, the last time that Neptune was in the sign of Aries was in the 1860s, late 50s into the 60s. Early 1870s. This is the time in the United States of the Civil War. It's also the time of like idealizing soldiers and heroes. And it's a time when people like idealize leaders. And so I wonder if during, we'll see a preview of some of this in the spring, summer, and into the fall. I wonder if, like, this is just me surmising things, is if we're going to see more sort of like, I don't know what the right word is, but like spiritual leaders, like gurus and things that come up and people just kind of flock to them and idealize them, because it's all about idealizing the individual and the hero. I think also there's going to be more emphasis on sort of individualism. I also see things like shifting towards idealizing like the masculine, or idealizing, like heroes and soldiers in the military, and also like sports and all these kind of like more Aries type individuals. Also people who are like daredevils, or people who are, doing things differently, rebels, and people kind of doing things on an individual type level. So I think there's some of that idealism going on. And just like with anything, idealism always like, it can go too far, right? Like you can have good leaders, out of Neptune and Aries, but you can also have people who are swindling people, right? Or the cult of personality. So I feel like there may be more of that coming up. Neptune and Aries too, I wonder if there's also going to be a shift to, because of idealizing the individual, moving away from sort of this, what's kind of gone too far with the Neptune and Pisces kind of thing, which was very much about like compassion and we're all one, which is good. But then it became like, I'm a victim and nothing is my fault, and the world is against me and I can do nothing. Is kind of the extreme of that, where I see people just blame everything on the world around them and never take personal accountability for anything. They just blame everything on everyone else. And now we might go to the opposite extreme, where it's like this, sort of individualism, and nothing is, the fault of this system, right? So it's like there's always a balance, but I wonder about Neptune and Aries kind of going to the other side. The other thing with Neptune is it represents the ocean, and I do worry about it being in Aries, which is a fire sign. Are we going to see warming of the ocean? I also, because of some of the other, we have Saturn going into Aries, which we'll talk about in a bit. I worry about things like naval warfare or accidents at sea, just because Aries is a very fiery sign. Now, that's an extreme, like maybe an extreme interpretation, but I do think that is something that may be more likely as we get into Neptune and Aries years. Now, again, this is a very long transit. It's going on for the next 14 years. But I do think we'll get a preview of some of the themes that we'll be dealing with at the end of March, and then towards into like through the spring and summer until October. We'll see some of these themes that might emerge. So watch for that. Also look at the Aries house in your chart. It's going to be really active this spring, the Aries and the Pisces part of your chart. So look to that area. The next thing I'm going to talk about is Saturn is also switching into the sign of Aries. This is going to be in May. So this is May 24th, and he's going to be there until September 1st, when he retrogrades back into the sign of Pisces on September 1st. So Saturn, it changes signs about every 2.5 years. Saturn's going to go into the sign of Aries. He's been in Pisces for the last 2.5. He does retrograde, like I said, back into there in September, but he'll go back permanently into Aries, or for the next, not for another 30 years. He'll be back in Pisces in 2026. So again, we're getting kind of this preview of 2026. And this is happening, for, like I said, from May 24th to September 1st. And so Saturn is rules and order and boundaries, and also the things that like limit us or slow us down. It's also caution, telling us to be caution, to be organized. We need Saturn in order to get things done. We need constraints and limits. We need rules and things. Saturn in Pisces tends to have a more melancholy type of feel to it. I always think of it as like sad grunge poet kind of energy. It's like, oh, I'm so sad, I'm such a poet, right? But Saturn in Pisces also can be really good for creating foundations where we can create things, or having structures to be able to make something creative, to be organized in our creativity or in our spirituality as well. Now he's going to be moving into Aries, and this tends to be a more warlike type of energy, or energy that's more like, okay, we're making structures in order to create things or to move forward with action. Because Aries is about action. Aries is about the individual. It's about leadership. It also does have associations, unfortunately, with violence and war. And so there may be structures set up that are, kind of like I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer or anything, but it's kind of like the buildup. I see the buildup of military or arms or things like that, creating structures in those areas. I think too, though, it can also be like organizing ourselves individually, putting individual structures into our lives in order to better ourselves. Like it's not all doom and gloom. We can like use that energy towards something where we are creating something good for ourselves. But it is a very like, it is kind of it is putting some restraints on people, I think, when it comes to like issues of like, how do I put this into words? It's like people are I worry that people are organizing for war, or organizing to be more militant about something, or organizing to take action on things, because this could also be like people like social organizing, social justice organizing to take action on things is not necessarily always a negative thing. What's going to be happening though is because both Neptune and Saturn are going to Aries, they are conjoining each other, meaning together in the sky, on a sign basis, but they'll be particularly close in the month of July. They're not going to get exact, and that's not happening till next year, but they will be close in that month. But we will feel that shift, I think, as we in July, like in May, June, July, August, where we have Neptune with Saturn in Aries. Now, Neptune conjunct Saturn, interestingly, on a historical level, has had has often correlated with changes in Russia, or the Soviet Union, as it used to be called. So the last time we had Saturn conjunct with Neptune, that's when the Soviet Union fell in like the early 90s. And the time before that was when Stalin died. The time before that was the Russian Revolution. And the time before that, there was a czar that was assassinated. And so Saturn conjunct Neptune tends to be a time of change for Russia. And because this is not going to be exact, the exact one's not going to happen in 2026, I feel like changes are going to start to be set in motion there that will play out over the next couple of years, that will see major changes for that country. Another country that has strong associations with this is China as well. So I feel like there'll be some shifts in power dynamics on the world stage over the next couple of years. Now, on an individual level, Saturn conjunct Neptune tends to dissolve boundaries, or dissolve things that we just took for granted, like we thought were always going to be there, like the Soviet Union, for example. And then one day it just wasn't. It wasn't like there was a big war or something. It just one day it just dissolved. And so in our own lives, we may see in that Aries part of our chart something that just dissolves, something that just disappears, or a boundary that we had, or a restriction that we have that just suddenly goes away. The other thing too is that this can be a time where we build structures in which to be able to create things, because Saturn is structures and Neptune can be imagination, or structures to enhance our spirituality. So it doesn't necessarily mean that something's going to go away, but I do feel like there are changes coming in this area for all of us. The next thing I want to talk about is in June. June 9th, we have Jupiter moving into Cancer. He changes signs about every 12 months or so, so this is not unusual. But Jupiter is, right now he's in Gemini, which is expanding our ideas about things, bringing a lot of information to us, bringing ideas about technology. Now he's going to go into Cancer. Jupiter in Cancer is all about the comforts of the home. Jupiter in Cancer wants prosperity. He wants to nurture things. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to feel at home. Also, like, encourages creativity and imagination. This is very nurturing energy. So on one part, we have this like very fiery energy going on with both, we've had the retrogrades in the first quarter of the year, and then we have like the fiery energy of like Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And then we have Jupiter in Cancer going, listen, I'm going to take care of it all. You'll be comforted. You'll feel great. Like just wanting it to comfort us and bring comfort and joy into our lives. So Jupiter is bringing blessings to us in June, bringing optimism to us in the Cancer part of our chart. But generally, I think into things that feel very homey, very comforting. The next one I'm going to talk about is we have another outer planet changing signs. I told you it was a busy year. On July 7th, we have Uranus going into the sign of Gemini. So Uranus takes about 84 years to go all the way around the zodiac. He spends 7 to 8 years in a sign. Since 2018, he has been in the sign of Taurus, bringing changes to things like food and agriculture and the way we eat. Also Bitcoin, like money, all that. It's things on a global level. Because Uranus is sudden change, it's things that come out of nowhere. It's also inspiration, it's chaos, and it's technology as well. He's going into Gemini, and when Jupiter is in Gemini, we see big technological advances. The last time Jupiter was in Gemini was during the 40s. During the war, we saw a lot of advancements in things like radar. We got the television, like all sorts of advancements in communication and transportation technology. Before that, we're harkening back to the 1860s here. We had the Civil War, but we also had like we had the telegraph really become a thing that was widely used. Trains became more widely used. I mean, they were around before, but they were used much more. We had like, in the States, we had like the train system really start to explode, and people started to move across the states because of the trains and everything. So really big improvements in communication and transportation. Now, Gemini tends to rule short term or like short distance transportation. So this could be things like drones. It could be things like, unmanned vehicles, the electric car. All these things might become more widely used over the next 7 or 8 years. But I do see a lot of advancements in this particular area. So big changes in technology. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the Uranus in Gemini does seem to coincide in the United States with conflict. The last time was the Second World War. The time before that was, the Civil War. And the time before that was the American Revolution. So, I'm crossing my fingers. I hope that there isn't a conflict for the States. I don't live in the States personally, but living in Canada, we are affected by what goes on over there. But I'm hoping, cross my fingers, not. I'm hoping it's more of just like more of the unfortunate call it. I hope for no conflict. Let's just say, but it does tend to coincide, and that is something that I am paying attention to, and a lot of astrologers are paying attention to at this time. Let's cross our fingers and hope that there's not, that it's just technological advancement for all of us, right? Now, I do want to talk about, we have Pluto is in Aquarius. We have Neptune in the sign of Aries, and then we have Uranus in the sign of Gemini. And so they're going to be forming what was called a minor trine. So three of them are working together in harmony. So we have this switch from like earth and water signs to fire and air signs now. So we have Pluto in an air sign, we have Uranus in an air sign, and they're trining each other, and they're both making a sextile, which is another harmonious aspect with Neptune in Aries. And so all three of these planets are working together. They're going to be in this loose trine for quite a while, where they're working together to enact change. And so this is going to be a time of profound change, I think, in the world. We have Pluto, who's transforming things, with technology and with community. We have Uranus bringing big changes, again, with technology, with communication, transportation. And then we have Neptune idealizing things, idealizing the heroes, idealizing, individualism and exploration and pioneering things. And so I think this is going to be the beginning of some really profound changes that we're going to be seeing over the next decade or two. So watch in the summer kind of what's happening, because spring and summer is when we start to see some of these themes really start to play out. The next thing I want to talk about is our next Mercury retrograde, which will be on July 17th to August 11th. This one is entirely in one sign. It is in the sign of Leo, from 15 degrees of Leo back to 4 degrees of Leo. So if you have planets around those particular degrees or in the sign of Leo, this one's going to affect you more than others. Again, Mercury retrogrades, they happen 3 times a year. Time to slow down, relook at things, miscommunication, travel delays, watch for that. That's in July. The next one we have is September. We have the next 2 set of eclipses. These ones are fully in the Pisces and and Virgo axis. So the first is a lunar eclipse on September 7th at 15 degrees of Pisces. So information that we're finding out in the Pisces area of our chart. Lunar eclipses tend to reveal things. Pisces tends to rule things like spirituality. It also rules institutions like prisons and hospitals. It also is about creativity. So there may be some things that come out in these areas in the news. And then September 21st, we have a solar eclipse at 29 degrees of Virgo. So solar eclipses are beginnings and endings. So again, look at the Virgo house of your chart. But Virgo tends to rule things like labor, like work that we do day-to-day routines, healthcare, pets. There may be some big changes in these areas around this time in September. One thing I want to mention in the fall is that we do have some of those outer planets retrograde back into the signs they were before. So it's kind of like we got a preview over the spring and the summer of the changes they're going to be bringing to us. And then they kind of go back into the signs they were before to kind of clean things up, finish out things in those areas. So like I said before, we have the first is Saturn goes back into the sign of Pisces for the rest of the year on September 1st. We have Uranus go back into the sign of Taurus on November 7th. And we have Neptune go back into the sign of Pisces on October 22nd. So the fall will see some of those old energies returning after that preview. And then I think I have one last thing, and that is we have our last of our Mercury retrogrades happening on November 9th to November 29th. This is from 6 degrees of Sagittarius back to 20 degrees of Scorpio. So look at the Sagittarius and Scorpio areas of your chart. Again, if you have planets in these signs or you have planets around those degrees, gonna feel it a little more than others. On November 18th is when Mercury retrogrades back into Scorpio. And so again, Mercury retrogrades, there may be some miscommunications, communication may slow down in these areas, travel delays, all of the usual Mercury retrograde things. And then December is pretty quiet, but as you can see, it's a pretty eventful year. And we're going to be seeing some previews of what's going to be happening over the next decade or so. And so this can be exciting and a little scary, but just remember that these are transits that happen over a long period of time. It's not like things are going to change overnight, but we are going to start to see some of the themes that are going to be reoccurring over the next decade or so. We do, while some of these things like especially the Neptune conjunct Saturn do seem maybe a little scary, especially Saturn in Aries, Uranus going to Gemini, kind of having that correlation with conflict. There are other things that are happening that are trying to help us. It's not all doom and gloom. I don't want people to take that away from this. I think it's just this is going to be a time of profound change and a time when sort of the chessboard of the world is reshuffling a little bit. And we're reshuffling things in our own lives as well. And so we do have, though, Pluto and Neptune and Uranus forming a minor trine, meaning they're working together to create changes. And at the point of that triangle is Neptune trying to bring us to our ideals, trying to bring us towards better things. But I think that, sometimes, changes are difficult and hard, and they are distributed unevenly, as we know, throughout the world. And then I also am hoping that, we have that Jupiter in Cancer bringing to us that sense of nurturing and care for each other as well, wanting to expand that, which I think is also very hopeful. So 2025, I think is going to be a year that's really a time of profound change, I think, for all of us. And it's one where we're going to see a lot of shifts globally. I think it'll be an interesting year, that's for sure. Again, if you want a reading from me about how this year is going to affect you, you can check out my Etsy channel linked below. I do have a sale on December and January for year ahead readings, both my astrology reading, and I have a God and Goddess reading and an angel reading as well, if you are interested in that. I have free resources. You can follow me on, I'm not on Twitter anymore. I've abandoned Twitter, but I am on Threads and Blue Sky, where you can follow me for just little astrology tidbits and things. I also have my free newsletter on my website, which you can sign up for. And if you want, you can to support me on Patreon. I do have my weekly astrology forecast, so you can check that out there. Thank you for watching. This is one of the longer videos that I've done. I really appreciate it. I think it's going to be an exciting year. Thanks for listening to Ramble. What are your thoughts about things? Do you have any questions? Let me know. I would love to hear. And as always, just thank you so much for being here. And thank you to my patrons. Thank you for supporting me. I appreciate it so much. And as always, peace and love and